Welcome to Werewolf Wednesday on Scary Stories NYC. So let's get right into the first one. It's called Across the Street from a Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this story happened just after I finished college and had a job in a delicatessen in town. I was living in a small room I rented near the deli, although my girlfriend was trying to get me to move in with her. She had a nice, large, sunny apartment, but even half of her rent was still more than I was paying for my room, so I was resisting her idea. Eventually, the situation would be resolved for us by the dog man. I don't want to say too much about the location in which this took place because I'm still a bit paranoid about the entire thing, but let's just say it happened in the Midwest in the earlier part of the 21st century. When I was moving in, one of my neighbors had noticed that I collected Star Wars stuff back then. I don't anymore, but at that time I was a huge fan. Let's call this neighbor Brad, which was not his real name. He told me that he was friends with a guy living across the alleyway who had the ultimate Star Wars collection of action figures and so forth, and that I had to come visit his place at some point. He claimed the guy's collection was like a Star Wars museum practically. I said great, but never expected to ever be thinking about the subject ever again. Now, my apartment was at the edge of town, and I had a supermarket on the corner, plus fast food places and basically everything I needed within a 3-block radius, so I could save money by not driving. If you exited our building in the rear or via the alleyway, you were only a block away from a park that was not very manicured. It was sort of like a little forest, and I liked going there when I needed to be alone. It felt like I was walking deep into nature in just a few minutes. I almost never saw anyone else using the area, but this story is about one of the only times I ever did. While I was sitting under a tree and not thinking one day, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, and I heard some sounds as though someone were running away. What I thought I had seen was something impossible. I really thought I had seen something that looked like a werewolf from the movies running past, as though a dog ran by, on its hind legs, I guess you might say. I knew that wasn't possible, so I wondered what I had really seen. I stood up and took a few steps in that direction, then wondered if I really wanted to know what or who was actually there. It might be something I couldn't unsee. Chickening out, I headed back to my room to not think there instead. I found myself doodling the dog-headed man I had seen whenever I had a pen in my hand for the next couple weeks. I don't draw very well, so I don't think the image was clear to anyone else. But I kept trying to capture what I thought I had seen. It remained a mystery and started to gnaw at me more and more until I went back to the woods to see if I could catch another glimpse of whatever it was. I saw dog prints there, but I don't know anything about tracking, and I couldn't tell if it were walking upright or in the normal down on all fours kind of way, so it wasn't really useful information. The tracks did seem large to me, but I don't really know what normal sized dog prints look like, so I had nothing to compare them to. Okay, so fast forward to one day when I saw my neighbor Brad from my building on the sidewalk. He was talking to some other dude with a unibrow. He told me this was George, the guy with the Star Wars collection, and they both invited me up to his room to see his stash. I had some free time before work, so I said okay and went up with them in the elevator. I noticed his building was cleaner than ours, even though it was right next door, and I asked what the rent was. Turns out it was even higher than my girlfriend's rent, so I stopped asking any other questions about that building. When we got to the guy's apartment, it turned out he did have an entire room full of shelves with Star Wars action figures and games on them, and 3 or 4 cosplay costumes displayed on life-size mannequins. His homemade Boba Fett costume was truly impressive. After he finished the tour of that room, he took us back to his bedroom to show us some more rare items, some of which I had only heard of and never actually seen before. George and Brad got lost in an in-depth Geekland discussion of something or other, and I did a double take because I noticed that George's bedroom window looked out directly onto my room. Through my window, my place looked like a mess. I decided to buy a shade, embarrassed to see what my life looked like from the outside. The two of them asked me what I was looking at, and I told them nothing, not wanting to call attention to my lack of private life on full display right outside. So that was the first time I met George, which is obviously not his real name, and we exchanged phone numbers. I think I had his first and last name programmed into my old, tiny cell phone. That was the era of flip-top phones with an antenna on them that you had to pull up before making a call. At any rate, he was a contact filed away and forgotten about. In spite of our mutual interest in science fiction, we had failed to hit it off in any significant way. So, one night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of someone falling over a garbage can in the alleyway below. I got up and groggily looked out my window to see if I could see what was going on. What I saw nearly made me faint. There, in the alley, 2 floors below me, was the thing I had seen out of the corner of my eye in the woods that day. I grabbed a drawing I had done of it and held it up by the window. That was it exactly. I wondered if I were dreaming, and I became cynical. I wasn't sure how to tell if this was real or not, but I felt it was too impossible to be real. Remember, I was still half asleep. My attention was drawn back to the creature as it staggered to its feet, holding its side as though it were in pain. I pulled my recently bought shade down and turned off my room light. Then I squatted down and observed the action. It was not apparent whether the creature had hurt its side when it tripped over the garbage, or if it was hurt beforehand, which led to it tripping over the can. In either case, it appeared to be limping a bit and having some trouble walking. It really was a man-type creature, but covered in hair and with a dog head. The ears were upright, and the snout long, like that of a wolf. It seemed to be mainly gray, but with all shades from black to white sprinkled in. It was very monochromatic. I did not see its eyes from my angle, but it had a tail like that of a beagle, long and bony like a whip. I saw it leaning back to look up, and I pulled my head back down. Peeking, I could see it was looking up at the fire escape of the building across the alley. That was when I noticed the ladder was down at the bottom. The creature leaped and grabbed the bottom rung, letting out an uncomfortable grunt when gravity pulled him down again. Although he was obviously uncomfortable, he was also more athletic than almost anyone I'd ever seen, and he scrambled up the fire escape in no time flat to the 3rd floor. Once there, It wasted no time diving feet first into the open window of... Wait, wasn't that George's room? I panicked and grabbed my phone. That thing was going into George's apartment. I needed to call him and warn him. A second before calling, though, fear froze my finger. If I told him what I had just seen, I would also be revealing which window was mine. I would also be revealing that I had an awareness of which window was his. I would be making it seem as though I had been spying on him, which I really had not been doing. Guilt consumed me. I wasn't sure what was the right thing to do. I called the police instead. I gave them George's address and apartment number, told them I saw a prowler go in the window, then hung up when they started trying to ask me for more information. Then I went back into peeking out the window and waited for something to happen. His apartment seemed dark and quiet, and it looked like someone had closed that fire escape window. Eventually, the cops arrived, but left again just a few minutes later. Confused, I went back to bed and tried to get some sleep before work. A couple of days later, I ran into Brad and George on the sidewalk again. Brad called me over and told me that George had just gotten out of the hospital. They both told me that George had fallen in the woods and had a broken rib to show for it. I acted as though I weren't really interested, but actually, I was kind of in shock by the implication of what they had just told me. All that day at work, I was distracted. I hadn't dreamed of seeing that werewolf. I really had seen it, and it really had climbed up to George's room, because it was George. Before leaving work, I asked my girlfriend if the offer still stood for me to move in with her. She said yes, and I started packing that very night and moving things over to her place the next morning. Even though George was always nice to me, and even though we shared a common interest in the old Star Wars movies, I had no interest in living across the alley from a werewolf.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you more fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Werewolf of the Everglades. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Most of the Dogman and werewolf stories I hear you tell take place a long time ago, in the dark of night and in the middle of the forest. My one encounter with the strange happened in broad daylight, down in the swamps of the Florida Everglades, and only about 3 years ago. Okay, I had just broken up with a girlfriend right before this incident happened. My usual thing to do after a breakup is to resume whatever it was that this particular girlfriend had interrupted. Women will usually try to change something about you, get you to break up with friends she doesn't like, or get you to throw out stuff you collected that she thinks are uncool, or get you to stop listening to a certain kind of music, whatever. This particular girlfriend had sort of forced me to stop my interest in cryptids and in nature generally. I used to go out squatching before I met her, and I hadn't since. So, to help myself get past this loss, I decided to go out to the closest natural area near where I was living over there in Florida at the time. That was the Everglades. I decided to jump in the car and go look for the skunk ape. I wasn't up to making a full expedition yet, but I had heard there were wooden boardwalks built through parts of the jungle down there, and I decided to have myself a stroll just to see what I could see. I don't remember exactly where I was that day, but I found one of the parking lots, parked, and got out to walk. The wooden path over the swamp went right up into the lot, giving one of the wildest jungles in the world this sort of Disneyland ride feeling. It must not be dangerous if it's easily accessible to tourists. My subconscious mind seemed to accept this without question. There were no other cars in the parking lot though, so I was happy at the thought that I might get to be the only human out there, seeing whatever it was that I was going to see. So imagine my disappointment when I got out on the boardwalk and I saw another person down a bit further. I stopped short and decided to leave him his space and just catch the view from where I was. There was very tall grass, and in places you could see that most of the ground under was actually shallow water. It smelled like stuff was rotting all around, and I imagine that was because stuff was rotting all around. I heard something making an odd moaning sound, and I imagined it was an alligator somewhere hidden in the tall grass. I don't really know what it was, but a splashing sound from the same direction seemed to support my thesis. When I got bored looking at the vegetation, I turned around and checked out the view from the other side of the walkway. I eventually tired of that too and wanted to walk further in, not go back to my car. I turned to see if that man had walked on, but he was still in the same spot as before. He was not looking out at nature any longer, however. At first I couldn't understand what he was doing, but then I realized he had removed his boots and was taking his jeans off in a manic fashion. This sent alarm bells off inside of me, and I immediately began walking back the way I had come from. I tried to act nonchalant and relaxed, but I was a bit nervous. I checked over my shoulder to make sure the gentleman was not heading toward me, and I saw that he looked differently than before, but I wasn't sure exactly how. I walked on further before chancing another glance behind me, and in the place of the man stood a very tall, bear-like creature. Now I began to jog out, as this was the most upsetting thing I had ever seen. I was terrified right there in broad daylight on a hot and sunny day. Something was happening behind me, which was impossible. I no longer wanted to see anymore, and I swore I would never ask for any explanation as long as I could get out of this situation unharmed. A loud splashing sound drew my attention, and I turned to see that the creature that had been a man only a minute earlier was now up to its broad, hairy chest in the water beneath the bridge and was wading out into the swamp at a remarkable speed. It was like the water offered no resistance at all for this creature. It must have been unfathomably strong to make the time it was making. No longer threatened as the creature was speeding away from me, I had a chance to see it from the back. The shoulders were massive and human-like, but the head seemed like an animal. It resembled either a dog head or a hog head, with tall ears on top. The hair was bristly like a wild boar, but thicker, like that of a dog or a wolf. I don't know where it was headed, but it sure seemed in a rush to get there. To wrap my mind around what I had just witnessed, I turned back to where the man had been, and, sure enough, I could still see his clothes and boots left right where he had taken them off. I felt an overwhelming urge to go inspect the clothing, but my fear of how fast that creature could move overruled that urge. I resumed my march back to the parking lot and beat a hasty exit out of there. A couple of weeks later, I made friends with some squatchers, and when they asked me if I knew a good place to hunt for cryptids, the Everglades did pop into my mind. But what I had witnessed was apparently some sort of shapeshifter, if it wasn't just a hallucination on a hot summer day. Most Bigfoot hunters don't accept the idea of shapeshifters, or they didn't back then at least. So I kept my mouth shut about the entire incident. I had nobody with me to corroborate what I had seen, and I certainly had been under a lot of emotional stress immediately prior to the occurrence. Maybe it never really happened. Maybe my mind projected the entire thing out there, and maybe it all happened inside my imagination. For all these reasons and more, this right here is the first time I've ever told anyone about the werewolf of the Everglades.
Now he's a sticker sticking to my butt, sticking to my wall, everywhere I look, sticking where you like, with some exceptions, nothing to get is in that description. I'm gonna call him Scary Sticker Man, yo.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.